the book of Romans. And I would like to go to chapter 6. I have to read a little bit in chapter 5, but not overbearingly, just a little bit. The book of Romans is regarded as Paul's treatise of the gospel. And the question becomes, how can it be the treatise of the gospel if it has none of the characteristics of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? The question is, how can we say gospel at all to the epistle of Romans when he doesn't deal with any of the historicity of Jesus Christ? He doesn't deal with any geographical location, and yet still it's regarded as his treatise of the gospel. When we read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we understand the Christ event, because the historians present Jesus Christ primarily in his humanity in the Gospels, because it's essential and important to understand that it's through his humanity that we get to his divinity. He has to come and touch us in the commonness of our humanity in order to get us to his divinity. The gateway through to the divinity of God is through the humanity of Jesus Christ. And so the writers have presented him in a manner that speaks of his geographic location and his historical existence, simply because every human being lives in a particular place and at a particular time in history. Every human being has to live in a particular place and a particular time. Jesus was so particular in his place that he didn't go 100 miles from where he was born. He was so located that he didn't transverse beyond 100 miles. And so the historical presentation of Jesus Christ is essential for us to become a part of the Christ event. So the question now becomes, how does it follow that Paul's writing in Romans is a treatise of the gospel? Well, if you search in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you will not find the philosophical theology that you see in Romans. You will not see the word propitiation. You won't see reconciliation, redemption, adoption. You will not see atonement. You will not see the basic rudiments of soteriology in the Gospels, even though the historical and the geographical presentation has those things covered. What we have is Paul presenting to us the behind the scenes of what is going on in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He's giving us the theological philosophy associated with the historical presentation of Jesus Christ. One of the writers declared that we should have some knowledge of what it is that brought us into salvation, and we should be able to explain and to express our beliefs. And Paul is the one who presents Jesus Christ in such a manner. Just to think about his presentation is to ask yourself the question, what kind of spiritual place he was in for God to give him the kind of revelatory experiences that he had. Indeed, and in fact, what we call revelation today is simply illumination, because the revelation is already written in front of us, and we were not there to receive the revelation. What we spend our time doing is illuminating what has already been revealed. I don't want to get on that, because immediately, can I digress for a minute? Can I just move out of that? It is interesting how we can be so dogmatic on our interpretation, to the point where we separate ourselves from so many people based on our interpretation. Does anybody have a pair of dark glasses? You got a pair of dark glasses? Bring me a pair of dark glasses. See, I don't think I have one in my bag. It's nighttime. It's an interesting concept that we are interpreting what has already been revealed. I did not sit with God when he was talking to Paul about Romans. And there were certain things you couldn't think up. There were certain things that just wouldn't pass your cognitive journey. They wouldn't come. When you talk about being chosen in him before the foundation of the world, that's not something you can conjure. That's nothing you can just think of. If God doesn't give you that kind of revelatory experience, that's something you could never know. And it's an interesting thing about God is he's never recognized, he's always revealed. Because my intellectual ability, my cognitive energy cannot fathom God. He has to be revealed. The interesting thing is that we fight each other and we separate from each other over our interpretation. My interpretation is so powerfully accurate until I ignore yours. The interesting thing is that God doesn't give any one of us all. There is no one individual who has all of the knowledge of God. And the knowledge of God is so idiosyncratic. My conceptualization of God is so idiosyncratic that nobody in here can duplicate or imitate my concept of God. And I can't imitate or duplicate yours. One of our problems is that we try to clone people. And once you clone an individual, you completely eradicate the idiosyncratic revelation that they have. If you try to be like me, you cheat me. You cheat me when you try to be like me. I'm the best me anybody can be. What you cheat me of is yourself. Because I need you to formulate the total picture of God, to comprehend with all saints. Because you don't have a title does not indicate that you don't have an experience with God. You're just as significant sitting in the back row as anybody sitting up front, because that's why we share. We share because there's an insight you have that I don't have. But I'm so gung-ho about my interpretation that I won't listen to you. Now, it's not revelatory to me. It's illuminated to me. I'm interpreting what has already been revealed. Now, the person to whom it was revealed, he says, I look through a glass darkly. Now, the individual who sat at Jesus' feet, he says, I don't have it clearly. Yet still I'm interpreting the one who says he doesn't have it clearly, but I have it so clear until I can throw you away. Should I go over that again, or did you escape that? I did not sit at the feet of Jesus and receive the revelation of Romans. I am interpreting what has already been revealed. When I talk about the Lord reveal something to me, if it came from the Bible, it was illuminated, not revealed. It was already revealed to them. I am interpreting. Now, how can I see it so clearly in an interpretation when the revelatory individual says, I don't see it clearly? God spoke to him about Romans, and he didn't see it as clearly as he should. Yet still I'm interpreting what he doesn't see clearly, and I see it more clearly than he does. Anyhow, he opens and he points one barrel of the shotgun against mankind in general. And what he says to mankind in general is, you wouldn't want to accept God as God. You didn't want to treat him as God. So what you did was you decided to put God on trial to see whether or not you would deal with God. So God says, okay, since you put me on trial, I will give you a mind that can't try anything. And when a man is going with a man like he's going with a woman, and a woman is going with a woman like she's going with a man, then obviously she has a mind and he has a mind that can't try anything. Because anytime you can mistake the anatomical situation of somebody that you're with, then we call that a reprobate mind. Something has gone wrong with the mind. In chapter number 2, he turns the other barrel of the shotgun on the Jewish people, and he says to them, you had the Pentateuch, you had the Torah, you had the law, pillar of fire by night, pillar of cloud by day. You had the temple, you had the tabernacle, you had the poets, you had the prophets, and you still didn't serve God. By chapter 3, he concludes that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. He had to preach the doctrine of condemnation before he went to the doctrine of justification. He goes into justification, and that's where we're going to pick up now. I just wanted everybody to be with me. He goes into justification, and he's saying essentially that you can no more justify yourself than Abraham can have a child at 100, his wife being 90. Well, God is saying, now if you can do that, then you can justify yourself. If you can't do that, then you can't justify yourself. And he makes a case that justification cannot be by works. Justification has to be by faith. I have to believe in order to be justified because I can't work to achieve it. It's here where we pick up now because he's dealing now with the issue of law. And when I heard the choir singing tonight, I thought that maybe the Lord needed to give me a sign that I was in the right place at the right time with the right word. In Romans chapter 5, he says, therefore is as by, verse 18, therefore as by the offense of one, judgment came upon all men to condemnation. Even so by the righteousness of one, the free gift came upon all men unto justification of life. For as by one man's disobedience, many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one shall many be made righteous. Moreover, oh Lord, anytime you start seeing moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound. But where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. That as sin hath reigned unto death, even so might grace reign through righteousness unto eternal life by Jesus Christ our Lord. Now, one thing we have to remember that when Paul wrote Romans, he didn't divide it in chapters. The canon divided and made chapters. And what it does psychologically is it makes us think that one thought is finished and another began, but that's not true. In many instances, the verse that opens the next chapter is linked to the previous chapter directly and actually finishes the thought. One of the things we get so wrong is Hebrews chapter 1, when we talk about faith, and I hear the theologians saying now faith, as if that's a now on faith. As if it's a contemporary faith. It's a this minute faith. And it has nothing to do with that. It connects us to the previous verse, and it's not dealing with right now. But anyway, because of the connection, the question arises, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Know ye not that so many of us, as were baptized unto Jesus Christ, were baptized unto his death? Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of God, even so we also should walk in the newness of life. I want you to look at somebody with all the ebullience you can muster and ask them, if it wasn't for grace, where would I be? Thank you, choir. The question that I'd like to open with is, how far is God prepared to go? How far is he prepared to go? And I think that when we consider the scriptures conceptually and illustratively, the Bible is simply all about God's capacity. Everything that is written here, we have characters in the scriptures, but the characters are never the star. God is always the star. It's a critical truth that's overlooked many times, and I don't do stories very well. I deal more in definition than description. Don't do stories very well because we have a proclivity to spiritualize the stories. And we beat upon certain people who shouldn't be smacked around because they're not the real, they're not the star. Can I digress again? It's Friday night. You take the brother, for instance, of the prodigal son who is at home, and he takes a British word, he takes a massive beating from the preachers. And that is that the boy was backslidden at home. He was just like one of the saints, just mean-spirited at home. And when you give consideration to that, you have to ask yourself, if you had left wonderful Nassau and you had to go to one of the remote islands in the Bahamas to take care of your mother, and you gave up your gated community house and you put your Ferrari on hold and your Mercedes-Benz, you put it in the garage and you covered it because you were covered your furniture. You went down to help your mom and you paid all the taxes, you bathed her, you watched over her, and you took care of her until she died. And finally, mother's gone home, to your chagrin, to your pain. And at the repast, all of your brothers and sisters have come in. They have flown in from New York. They've flown in from Seattle, Washington. They've come from Copenhagen. I mean, they've flown in from all over the world, having lived wonderful lives. And now that they're at the repast, they're saying to you, I think mother would have loved for me to have the quilt, and mother would love for me to have the picture over the bed, and they begin to divide the stuff. You didn't see them for 10 years. Nobody showed up to help anybody. Nobody paid a stitch of taxes. Nobody did anything, but they wanted everything like they were there all the time. Now, after the fight, after the log, after the court case, it would seem to me that you would be very normal if you decided that you didn't want them to have anything. It would be normal for you to have a disposition that says, I was here doing everything and you didn't show up. Now, we beat the brother up at home. But the brother was not even invited to the party. He was not even told they were having a party. He was just out there and heard the noise. And he had to ask the servant, well, what in the world is going on? It's a normal reaction to say, I've been here laboring and my daddy didn't do any of this for me. I've been here and my wasteful brother went and spent all of his goods. And he is the one getting a ring and getting a party, and I'm here working. The boy is normal. He does not have to be beat upon. He is normal. But the Father's love is so splendiferous in its magnanimity, it makes normal look like evil. The Father is the star. Oh, I feel a little church. How far does God intend to go? Because God now is about to bring into focus something that he obviously had in mind before the foundation of the world. Salvation, then, you don't mind if I don't preach health, wealth, and prosperity tonight? Is that okay? I'll do that another time. Salvation is an enormous display of what God wants to do and what God has done. The greatest power of God is exhibited in salvation more than any other thing that a human being can experience. I would like to call this by any means necessary. And that is, he saves to the uttermost. He goes to the guttermost and saves to the uttermost. And he does it in a way that is unfathomable to the human mind. In fact, Paul says it's going to take eternity for us to understand the enormity of God's grace. And it's really interesting how we can reduce that enormous blessing to 50 or 20 or 100 or $200. There is no monetary value that can evaluate on any level the enormous display of power that God exhibited in grace. It takes his eternal wisdom with his eternal love and his eternal justice, and to find a solution when his omnipotence is involved in his justice and in his love. How do I find a solution to you loving me and at the same time releasing me when you are totally and completely just? How does love and justice come together to release me when each one has eternal qualities? I'm not talking about loving, just a quick love affair. I'm talking about God being love and loving me to the point where part of him, all of him, because any part of him is all of him, wants to release me, and yet the other part that's all of him wants to judge me. And how do you come to a solution? How do you let me go when I'm bringing absolutely nothing to the table? Can I go deeper before we go higher? We can have some church. Now, it's critical to understand that the conceptualization of grace had to be in God's mind from eternity. It is not something that he just made up when he found out we were in trouble. And so when Paul says in Ephesians, we were chosen in him before the foundation of the world, then that is anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic simply means a term that is stated in the human realm to give us a divine idea about something that never really happened. Anthropomorphic, it's a term where he's trying to explain to us something that goes on in a divine environment that we can't truly and fully understand. Do you remember when he was talking to Nicodemus? He says to Nicodemus, how can I talk to you about earthly things and you can't grasp the earthly? How are you going to grasp the celestial? I mean, I can't talk to you in your own terms and you understand, how are you going to understand the heavenly? Let's take a little walk about your grace and the grace that God has given us. It had to have been in his mind from eternity, because he is an eternal being. If he's an eternal being, then he has no beginning, he has no ending. Now, this is problematic to me as a child growing up, listening to my dad preaching about God's being eternal. And I'd say, well, Dad, I have a problem with that. And that is, how did he ever get to right now? Dad, how could he get to right now? You see, because if I go back into the past of God and I keep going and 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 don't reach a starting point, how did he ever get to right here? I mean, really, if I start going and going and going and going and there's no stoppage to just go and go and go and go and go and go and go, how does he get to right now? I mean, if I keep going and going and going and there's no starting point, how did he get to here? Well, the problem with my little puny mind was that I was trying to equate eternity with time. I was trying to define eternity within the parameters of time, and that it can't be done because eternity is antithetical to time. It's contradistinct. You can't use one to describe the other. That means then eternity is of ever-present is. There is no future in eternity. There is no past in eternity. It is always a right now. Now we have a problem. We have a problem. We have a problem because if he's eternal and you add to him another attribute, omniscience, now we got a problem. And the problem is, when did he choose? I mean, the issue here now is he's eternal. He has no beginning. Now I've got to go anthropomorphic again. Anthropomorphic. You got to explain. Excuse me. I have to use an anthropomorphic term in order to explain an action that didn't really happen. Now, he's eternal, he has no beginning, but he's omniscient, which means that he has all knowledge at all anthropomorphic, quote unquote, time. I gotta stick time in there, which means from his beginning, and he has none, then he always had all information, which means there's never, quote unquote, time in the existence of God when he didn't have all knowledge, which means God always knew everything and you can't teach him anything because he always knew everything. Now, if he always knew everything from his conceptualization and he has no conceptualization, then when did he choose? Do I have to work with that again? I mean, clearly, he has had all knowledge from his beginning and he has no beginning, which means that you cannot separate any kind of knowledge in God. God always had all knowledge. It's not like you and I going down to the supermarket to find a pair of shoes, and on the way down we have an idea about what we wanted, but we didn't know the specific shoe we were going to pick. Went through 20 of them, God help you, until you found the one, and generally you go back to the first one and take it. After I've sat there for 3 or 4 hours waiting, you go back and get the first one, leave with the first one. The whole point is that's not God. There is no time in God's mind that God didn't have all information, which means from his concept, and he has none, he knew he would call you, and you are as much as a part of God's mind as he is. He cannot separate you from him once he has chosen. Oh, God have mercy. Which means while I'm sitting here fussing about the problem, I should be asking God for the solution, because he had a solution before I ever had a problem. I feel something helping me here. It's critical now because the question is, how far will he go? And how far is he prepared to go? You have to reach back. I hope I'm not working you too hard. We have to reach back to Romans 3 because it's all together. He talks about us and he says, there is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are all together, oh my God, become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good. No, not one. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing, bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace have they not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now, how do you get to me when I don't bring anything to the table? I consider, go deeper, go higher. When you consider privileges and how privileges are abused, and many times for those of us who have parents, the greater the privilege, the more pain and devastation on part of the benefactor. The greater the privilege that you measure out. I'm only going to do this 7 times, but touch your neighbor real quick. I'm not even going to borrow it now. This is not counted. Don't count this one. Touch your neighbor and say, grace is abuse proof. Amen. You can't abuse it. It's abuse proof. We're going to have some church. Just hold on. I got to have something to shout about. It's critical to understand that when the privilege is given, the more pain and devastation on the part of the benefactor, because I have given you the opportunity and I have spent my time. Let me put another way. My kids went to Ivy League schools, and Ivy League schools are a little expensive, you see. And I remember Eric went to Harvey Mudd, which is harder than MIT actually. And he's in school, and I am paying for the school. I am paying, and all I want him to do is study. I am paying. Then, and that was 15, 20 years ago, I was paying $30,000 a year before he got a little car and before he took the flights home. I'm forking out $30,000 annually. And so what I would do was I would tell my pilots, I said, now look, we're going down to Ontario. We're going down. They said, what are we going down to? I'm going to do a bed check tonight. That's what I'm doing, because I am working hard for him to go to school. Then his brother is going to Cornell, and thank God for his sister. She went to University of Texas. Thank God for her. And so now the privilege is there. You have the privilege, but don't misunderstand, and that is because you're not paying for it doesn't mean somebody didn't pay. Somebody else paid simply for you to have the privilege. And when that privilege is abused or misused, then the benefactor has some pain. But the greater the condemnation on the part of the abuser. Can I go there? There's a great condemnation on the abuser, because if the benefactor is hurt when he has provided a service you won't use, imagine what's going to happen to you when you discover what you played around with. The writer in Hebrews, he puts it this way. I hope I'm not going too fast. He says, but with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was not it with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? Grieved from the Greek stenazo, it means to groan. It's an inward, unexpressed feeling of sorrow. And it's translated grieved. The benefactor was grieved. I mean, really, I have taken you miraculously out of Egypt. And it's a 3 or 4 day, 6 day journey at most from Egypt to Canaan. And all you got to do is physically walk over here, and you're leaving slavery to ownership. Pray tell me, why is it taking you 40 years? I wish I could preach to some people. Can you imagine being with somebody and you can get your blessing in 6 days, but you're hanging with somebody who is so backwards that it's taking 40 years? I wish I could preach and sing. Can you imagine? Let's imagine I gave you a church. I gave you a church with 600,000 men. I gave you a church with 2.5 to 3.5 million people. And I come back 40 years later and you only have 2 and you didn't make it yourself. I don't think you handled that church too well. The people were of such that the Bible says that their carcasses, and what that means, it's a singular word in the Greek. It means limb by limb. They were dismembered because they had the privilege. The greatest privilege of all is grace. I wish I could preach to you here. I'm not talking about clothes and money tonight, and you can't say the bishop is a hater. That, well, you know, I'm writing a book now for the love of money, and you can't call me a hater, because whatever you think you have is somewhere near me. And so I'm not a hater, but I'm telling you that when we reduce what God has given us to another house, another car, a piece of clothes, we have reduced the greatest gift that a human being can ever have to things. The devil is a liar. You ought to praise God tonight just for being saved. If I don't get another house, if I never get another car, if I don't get another pair of Louboutin, I can lift my hands up and say I'm saved. I came in here with nothing, and I'm going to leave with nothing but what God gave me in my spirit. I feel a breakthrough coming. The greatest privilege of all, and Paul argues in this text that the grace has an abuse-proof clause. And he continues now from chapter 5 and verse 20. He says, now the law entered that the offense might abound, but where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. Now the law had to be dealt with as the law entered alongside. The law entered alongside not Adam. It didn't enter alongside Christ, of course. The law entered alongside sin. You see, sin entered into the world, and the law entered into the situation, thus created as an accessory or a subordinate thing. The law does not have decisive significance in history, which the objective power of sin has. Can I take that further? The law does not contribute to righteousness. It actually aggravates sin. Yes, it advertises and points out our inability to be righteous. And so what it does is it antagonizes and it incites sin. Oh, God, help me with this. I am, Lord help me, I don't know about you, I can only talk about me. And I am a sort of rebellious kind of a guy. I'm rebellious. Yes, I can't. I'm just rebellious. I remember when I was married, if I'm going along at 80 miles an hour, you should just sit there and just relax. Because if you say to me, I think you're going too fast, well, you're going to experience 100 miles an hour. You say, it's just a bad thing with me. If I'm going 20 miles an hour and you say, well, why are you going so slow? Well, you're going to experience 10 miles an hour or 5 miles an hour. If I'm changing my habits, don't say I'm proud of you. Just let me be. Because if you say something, immediately it stirs something up in me to rebel. I think that's why they say laws are made to be broken. The problem with the law is that the law comes alongside sin, and what it does is it now multiplies the offense, and it makes the offense even worse. Here is why. Man is sinning and he can't help himself. Because he's sinning, he just can't help it. Now, the law comes and the law says you are a sinner. You are no good. But the law does not help him to be any different. It just points out. How might I put this? Now she's leaving you, my brother, that she's leaving. And she's decided, she's packed up, the stuff is in the car, she's leaving. And you say to her, well, why are you leaving? It's a penalty. It's a penalty because of something you've done. And the law comes and tells you, she finally says, what you have done. But what you have done, she says, does not help you not to do it. It just points out what you have done. Now, it's the same thing with sin and death. If you notice, death reigned from Adam to Moses. There was no law, yet the penalty had already begun. And so now man is dying. He can't stop himself from dying. And here comes Moses to tell him why he's dying, but he can't help himself from dying. I feel something happening already. You see, the man is caught in a situation that was stimulated or caused by Adam, because Adam had the best opportunity not to sin. Are you with me? Adam was innocent, and he was not born in sin. He had no proclivity for sin. He was made in innocence. Somebody asked me the question, and the question was asked in Bible class. Well, Pastor, how is it then that Adam is not like Jesus? When Adam was first created, he was sinless. Does that make him like Jesus? I said, absolutely not. There is a difference between being innocent and being holy. Can I preach just a minute? You see, innocence is sinless, but sinless in innocence is not sinless as in holy. Innocence doesn't know. This is why we protect our children from the predator. We watch our little girls, and we as fathers particularly are extremely vicious when it comes to preying on our little girls. I had my little daughter when she was 12 years old, and I took her to a meeting with me, and she walked in. She was tall for 12, and I saw eyes go toward her. In the middle of the meeting, I was at Bishop Brazier's big church, and I said, stand up, Tiffany. And she stood up. I said, 12. 12. And 12. And I have 38 reasons why you ought to not even look at her. And if 38 is not enough, I can find 357 more reasons why you ought to let her alone. And shame on you mothers who have to have a man so bad that you let him abuse what... Oh God, the whole point here now is that the law in innocence, his innocence is not holy. Holy is what we're trying to be. There is nobody in here who is innocent unless your little baby stuck in here somewhere. Every one of us, can I just preach like I feel it? There are times in your life, there are certain things that we have done in our lives that once we step across that threshold, we can't go back. I wish I could talk to some real people. I'm going to talk to some grown folk one day. There are certain things that we have done that you can never think of what it was like before you got involved with that. It just moved you to another level. But I'm trying to be holy now. I'm not trying to be innocent. No. My innocence is long gone. The real power of holy above innocence is I've been there and I've done that. And I can tell the devil when he's coming because I have been through innocence. I wish I could preach to you. I have come past innocence, so you can't play a game on me at my age now. I can see you coming a mile away because I ain't innocent. I'm trying to be holy, and holy says I know, and I got the victory over that. You ain't got to protect me when I'm holy, but you got to watch out for me when I'm innocent. I'm almost there. It is so now then that the greater consciousness has arrived. Because once the offense is multiplied, because the law enter the flesh, and it evokes its natural antagonism to God, and so it stimulates it unto disobedience. So now, as the offense multiplied, the need for redemption and the sense of that need were intensified. It's an interesting dynamic because now there is greater consciousness, but the increase is of the actual transgression. Here's what happens. It increases my guilt. It increases my anxiety. It increases my sinful activity. Can I just tell you one of the wonderful things about God is that you cannot out-evil God's goodness. I wish I could preach somebody here. I want to, most of us, how many folk grew up in the apostolic way? Let me see your hands. All right, you came up. I want to preach to some people who would just low down, drag out, didn't know nothing about church, that comes straight off the street. Because when people understand that what you have received, you didn't get it on your own. I want to talk to somebody that's been in prison for about 10 or 15 years and somebody that's been in the worst state of mind, because some of us act privileged and we act like we can put people out. Can I ask you a question? How can you put somebody out of a place that you don't deserve to be in yourself? Help me, Jesus, help me. It is critical now because grace hoper periseno, and that is where sin increased plenazo, grace superabounded, and then some on top of that. In other words, the greatest power to make evil subject itself to good is God. Isn't he the one who projects overcome evil with good? In other words, do you have a storage of evil that is so great that you can present it to God and he back up and he say, I can't deal with that? I don't care who you are and where you've come from. You are not so horrible that you can stop the blood of Jesus from purifying you. I feel something pushing me now. So the question is asked because the legalizers came up. Because grace is often misunderstood by legalists, by folk who walk around in church and talk about, I found Jesus. You ain't found Jesus. You found Jesus. Yes, Jesus kneeled down in front of you and you tripped over him and then you said, oh, I found him. No, you didn't found him. He found you. Oh, I feel the Holy Spirit here. I just want somebody to be happy about being saved. Not about your car, not about your house, but just about being saved. Paul is not asking this question for his sake because he understood grace. The questions are rhetorical because they have been asked by the legalist. He answers the first question regarding his doctrine of grace, and he does that in 2 and 14 when he says, 2 through 14 rather, when he declares the mechanical impossibility of a Christian continuing to live a life of habitual sin. In verse 15, the same objective proposes a life or planned infrequent spasmodic acts of sin, since grace makes it impossible for a Christian to live a life of habitual sin. The question is, has he changed? And the Christian has changed, and Jesus's nature now in him is not to sin. Here's a question. Where sin abounded, there grace was in superabundance, and some on top of that. The objectors thought, do you mean to tell me that God is willing to forgive a person's sins as often as he commits them? And the answer is yes. Stay with me now. I know everybody here believes in holiness. Yes, as long as he sins. The answer is yes. The objector's thought follows now. If that be the case, shall the saints keep on habitually sinning in order to give God another opportunity to forgive us and display his grace? That's what we're going to deal with. I went down and I found an obscure quote, and it's from the Russian monk Rasputin, and he was a favorite, of course, of the Emperor Nicholas II. And here's what he said. He said, here's what he promoted. He said, the more a person sins, the more grace he receives. Therefore, let him sin with gusto, unquote. The first thing we have to settle tonight is regarding the word sin. Does it refer to the acts of sin, or does it refer to the nature of sin? The Greek syntax rule settles this because the article is before the word. Therefore, reference is made to the previously mentioned sin, which would be in Romans 21. That as sin hath reigned Now that is the nature, not acts, but the nature. You see, what you have in you now is the new man, and you're fighting the old man. I want to talk to somebody in a struggle. I want to talk to somebody who had to fight to get the new man. And the thing we do why we come to church, Bible class, pray, fast, is to build the new man, so the new man can have power over the old man. Can I talk to you a minute? Give somebody a high five. This is the first one now. And say, neighbor, you got to watch who you feed. You got to watch who you feed. You got to watch who you feed. Because if you feed the old man and don't feed the new man, then you're going to have some serious problems. You see, because now the reference to sin reigning as a king. So sin now is personified since it reigns as a king in the life of a person. Now, acts of sin do not reign as king. Acts of sin are a product or a result of some other dominant factor reigning as sin. So now then we have fixed it that it is sin nature. In verse 1, 2, 6, 10, 11, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 20, 22, and 23. It's all nature. Then we have to deal with meno, continue, to remain or abide. A person abiding in source of one's house as a guest, or a person abiding at home. There's a difference. There's an idea of fellowship or cordial relationship of dependence, of social intercourse. Here's how it goes. Shall we continue habitually to sustain the same relationship to the sinful nature that we sustained before we were saved? A relationship which was most cordial, a relationship in which we were fully yielded to and dependent upon that sinful nature, and all this as a habit of life, not acts of sins, but a habit of life. The question goes to the root, and the answer is God forbid. And what it says is, may such a thing never happen. I've got a clause in my grace. Oh, I wish somebody'd get it. I got a clause that makes this thing abuse proof. He goes now with his emotion, God forbid. Then he comes with an intellectual reaction. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? In other words, he's asking, how is it possible? It is not a question for information, but it is a present of a rhetorical question designed to declare the impossibility of a thing. It is mechanically impossible for a Christian to sustain the same relationship to the evil nature that he sustains before God saved him. I feel like preaching. And understand, grace does not come to somebody who is not born again. I feel like preaching. But grace has to bring you to a place of being born again. I've got to bring you to a new birth experience in order for you to operate within the parameters of my grace. I feel like preaching here. I might do a little talk at the end. Is that okay? But I feel a little church coming on. What he says to us is we are born again children of God. It is against our nature now to habitually yield to the evil nature. We are not persons of such nature as before. I want to push it a little bit. The inner spiritual and mechanical setup of a child of God protects him from habitually obeying the sinful nature. What God does, he does two surgical things. What he does, he performs in the inner being of every sinner he saves. He breaks the power of the indwelling sin. And secondly, he imparts the nature of his divine power. So now I'm dead to sin. I feel like preaching. Have you ever told somebody, you know, when you fall out with people, and for those of you who remember your relationships, you would tell somebody, lose my number. You just lose my number. But losing a number is not so final, because you can always get the number again. Lose it. But now when you tell somebody, you dead to me, you remember when you're telling me, you dead to me. When something is dead to you, it cannot influence you any longer. The problem we have as apostolics, I'm going to talk about apostolics, is that we like to baptize. We just love to baptize, but we don't spend time on bringing people to repentance. We baptize a lot of folk and we just got them wet, because the death, burial, and resurrection, the death is when I repent. The burial, I put you down in water because I don't put you down in earth. And when you rise to walk, you walk in the power of the new birth experience. I'm almost there. The critical thing here now is what we don't spend a lot of time doing, and that is we baptize people, but we don't bring them to perfection. The greatest problem, or the greatest job of the pastor, is not to bring people in off the street. When the saints are excited about their church, they'll bring the folk in. If you ain't gonna beat them up, if you ain't gonna tell them off every Sunday and talk to church people like they're not saved, then the sinner is saying, why should I go up in there? If the saints ain't saved, what am I doing up in there? Saints get excited and they'll bring the people to church. What my job is to take saved folk from being not conformed to this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I feel like having a little church. Give somebody a high five and said, I need a mind change. I need to know what God has done for me. I feel like shouting in here. You see, death then means separation, and physical death is separation of a person from his body. Spiritual death is the separation of a person from God, away from a PAW, separated from yet still left in his inner being. Can I preach that for a minute? You see, the flesh is going to die, but when I get the new birth experience and the new man comes in, I kill the flesh prematurely. Can I preach like I feel it? Give somebody a high five and say, my flesh is dying prematurely because my new man is killing my old man, and I'm coming to another height in God as I mature in God. Things I used to do yesterday, I can't do it anymore because something on the inside is driving me back to God. Can I preach like I feel it? I feel like lifting him up. Give somebody a high five and say, neighbor, what God did is unthinkable. He tells me now that one man brought sin into the world, and I had a problem with Adam because every Friday morning I had to get up for prayer before I went to school, and Sunday morning we had prayer too. What did prayer consist of? You would read, you would sing from the hymn book, and then you would pray, and then he would read the scriptures and explain it. And I would say, why are we doing this? We're about to go to church anyway, and we're going to be there from 9 until 3. So why are we going to this? And they said, Adam. I said, then bring Adam here. Let Adam go through all of this stuff. Why am I going through this? But I was sinned in Adam because Adam had the best chance. Notice God with the power that he has. He says, now this man is bringing nothing to the table. So I'm not going to discard Adam. Here's what I'm going to do with Adam. I'm going to make Adam a type of Christ. I feel like preaching. I'm not going to just walk on Adam, but I'm going to let Adam become a forerunner for Jesus, so that when you look at Adam, you can see Jesus. And if Adam has caused such a mess, then Jesus is going to cause such a bless. As bad as this world is, God said, how much more? I feel like preaching now. Give somebody a high five for the third time and say, neighbor, I cannot measure the how much more, but as bad as things are in the world, I can tell you for sure that the things of God are going to be so much greater, because I didn't work it out myself, but he worked it out for me. And I just want to stop by and give God the glory, because I couldn't do it myself. Can I preach like I feel it? I'm getting ready to close. I feel the power of the Holy Ghost. Pull on your neighbor and say, neighbor, I look good and I talk good and I walk right, but my holiness is not my own doing. Had it not been for the grace of God, I don't know where I'd be, but he brought me out with a mighty hand. He came looking for me in the cracks and the dark, and he knew I didn't have anything to offer, so he used weakness as a requirement for grace. Can I preach like I feel it? Give somebody a high five. Said if I wasn't weak, I couldn't have grace. If I wasn't low down, I couldn't have grace. If I wasn't nasty, I couldn't have grace. If I wasn't low and no good, I couldn't have grace. For the requirement of grace is that you're low down. The requirement for grace is that you're no good. The requirement for grace is that you're distasteful, that you are nasty. And God says, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the low down. I'm looking for the no good. I'm looking for the evil. Send me the witch. Send me the sorcerer. Send me the idolater. Send me the fornicator. I'm looking for the thief and the robber in order to bring him out. I feel like preaching to a group of folk who want to act like you've always been right. The devil is a liar. You need to open your mouth and tell the world, I haven't always been holy. I haven't haven't always been righteous, but I'm so glad. I'm so glad. So glad God brought me out. Y'all excuse me, but I know who I was. I know what I could do, but God brought me out. God made a way out of no way. Can I preach like I feel it? Give somebody a high five for the 5th time and say, neighbor, I don't have anything but praise for my God. I don't have anything but thanks for my God, because I am what I am. By the grace of God, I'm almost through. I'm almost finished. Pull on your neighbor. Say, neighbor, magnify the Lord with me. Let us. If I could get a church full of folk to realize it's not my goodness, but it's the grace of the living God. I'm getting ready to close, and I'm going to Revelation. When I look back in the past, I can declare this: nobody in here sends out an advertising looking for somebody that's no good to marry, want a relationship with a woman of the street, want an unfaithful woman to live with, want a low down woman to be my wife. No woman is asking and advertising for a man that ain't no good, that's low down and evil. You ain't calling for that. But I heard Jesus advertise, come unto me, all ye. Come unto me. Come unto me. Give somebody a high five. Said, I'm so glad I came. I'm so glad I ran to Jesus. So glad you couldn't stop me. The devil couldn't stop me. But I looked to the future, and I looked in Revelation, and Revelation is my future. And here's what happened. And when the beast gave glory and honor, somebody say glory and honor, glory and honor and thanks to him that sat on the throne, who liveth forever and ever. The 24 elders fell down before him that sat on the throne and worshiped him that liveth forever and ever. And what did they do? They took the crown from off their heads. They took of life from off their heads. They say, we're not worthy. We're not worthy. You did it all, so thou art worthy. Somebody say it. Thou art worthy, oh Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. Glory and honor and power. Glory and honor and power. You did it all. You brought me out. You made a way. You lifted me. I want to praise you. I want to thank you. somebody high five for the last time and say, neighbor, I can't wear it. I can't wear it. It belongs to him. Glory. I had a very rough year last year. I had 3-4 hours of back surgery. And before I could get to therapy, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. I sat with my cousin. My cousin is Justice Roy Jones. And we were talking about prostate cancer. It runs in the family's DNA. Before I could go to therapy, I had to have a prostatectomy. And before I could recover from that, my mother died. And the eagle that lives in the tree flew into my head. That's a rough year. Can't get any worse than that. And I felt sorry for myself. I canceled all my brothers, couldn't go. Canceled. Sat around feeling sorry for myself. Just, I found it. I'm writing a book. My daughter says I must finish it. Lessons I learned in 2017. I learned it's easy to preach to other people's situations while I was sitting there feeling sorry for myself. It's like God tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Now, brother preacher, now, Reverend, aren't you the one who did all of this shouting and running up and down, telling other people how to believe, how to get out of their trouble? Maybe you ought to listen to yourself." And he brought me to a place where I understood something. One lesson is, he said, I've delivered you all the time, but you need to know me not only as a deliverer, but as a sustainer. I said, I will not always deliver you from the fire, but I will come in the fire with you. I learned that lesson. But the biggest lesson I learned was centered around what we deserve and how we argue with God. I argued with God about what I didn't deserve. I did not know, rather, I argued with God about what I did deserve. But I don't argue with God about what I don't deserve. I got you. When I'm teaching young preachers, I teach them that one of the things you do is upset the equilibrium so that folk have to hang with you till you finish. Say something to get them off. Did he say what? Then they'll stay. I deserved prostate cancer. I deserved it. I deserved to have my back straightened. I deserved it. I was the one playing basketball when my wife wanted a car, and we had only one car, and I told her I wasn't bringing a car, I'm going to play ball. Went out there and cracked my back. And when I was 20-something years old, 40 years later, here it comes. I deserved it. Anything that happens negatively in my life, I deserved it. I deserve it. You know why? Because the wages of sin is death. And whenever something catastrophic happens, I go to complaining. But son, you haven't been nearly as holy as you've been unholy living with the devil. And you want things to change instantly when you get in here. But some things going to follow you. Some consequences you're going to have to deal with from stuff you did before you met me. I'm saving your soul. Your flesh going to reap a whole lot of stuff. And I complain about what I deserve, because as a sinner I deserve all the negatives. But which one of us has ever taken it up with God and got to complaining about what we don't deserve? I don't deserve to be standing here talking to you. I don't deserve to have 20,000 people in a church. I don't deserve the house I live in or the car I drive. I don't deserve to be sane. I don't deserve any of the good things that have happened to me. It's all by the grace of God. I am living a life that I don't deserve. And the wonderful thing about it is, my not deserving qualifies me. If I deserved it, I wouldn't have got it. But because I don't deserve it, I'm qualified. Because it's all unmerited faith. And I want to say to you, because oftentimes in our zeal for our personal holiness, we have kept people from God. We have kept them from God. We don't provide change of clothes for people, but when they come in looking funny in our sight, We make it impossible for them to have a comfortable trip in the church because our personal holiness makes them look like they're no good to us. But no good to us is what God is looking for. Can I take just a little time to close? Just a little time. I was preaching one day, just got up to preach. Young lady sitting with her son. And all of a sudden she was sitting beside somebody. We said, "Did you all sit down? I'm the only one working." And all of a sudden she got up and was breaking for the door. And I looked at one of my assistants and sent him. I just looked and, pointed my head to her, to him, and he went. She was a little high and a little low, sitting in church. And the person beside her made her so uncomfortable with making a couple of statements. You know how we do. She bolted for the door. She thought she was reasonably clothed. She thought she was clothed because the night before she was stripping, you see. She was a stripper. She was stripping on Saturday night, Friday night. So whatever she had on, in her mind, she was clothed. While she was in there stripping, some drunk fella said to her, "If you want to get a word, I know where you can go." And she dressed herself up, thought she was dressed for somebody to run her out. How can you put somebody out of a place that you don't deserve to be in yourself? I'm closing. When I was in Longview pastoring, and I'm really addressing those people who feel like they need to renegotiate with God this whole issue of grace. To renegotiate. Some people need to renegotiate. Their attitude says they have renegotiated. In other words, Lord, let's revisit this grace thing. Because really now, Lord, I've come to the place where I deserve to be saved. Look at my life, Lord. I'm holy enough that you can forget the grace with me. I'm righteous now. The grace is for the rest of these saints who still are in an undeserving position. There is nobody in here that can renegotiate grace. As long as you're in here, you will never deserve. Never deserve. And one level of not deserving is not greater than another level of not deserving. Not deserve is not deserve. If our churches are going to grow, not from us having babies in them, but from people coming off the street, we have got to reestablish the principle of grace in the house of God. I have one other story. In Longview, Texas. I'm old enough now to tell my stories. Had a young lady come up, little church. I had a little church in Longview. The walls were warped. It wasn't the architectural design. The walls were warped. And when you'd shout, you thought it was a Shekinah glory. It was just dust coming out of the road. Church up on a little red dirt road. Lady came in, seat 75. Lady came in and said to me, I'm up there trying to study my little message. Was about that big. And I'm working on it, nervous as I could be. In those days, I had to have lemon in my mouth to keep the moisture because I was so scared. And she said, I got a testimony, Pastor. I just want to tell my testimony. I said, tell me first. Before you tell anybody, tell me first. Let me hear this testimony. Because I had a lot of folk. I pastored my first church, had 16 mothers over 65. They kept my age because I was only 23, 24. They wouldn't tell them how old I was. And she said, Pastor, I was on the street trying to take care of my daughter. My mother put me out. I was a prostitute in Houston. And I went down to the docks in Houston. And man almost killed me down there. And I just wanted to tell how God delivered me even before I met him. I said, hold that testimony, baby. Don't tell that one in here. Don't tell no prostitute testimony up in here. Just they ain't ready for no testimony like this. One day I'm up there studying my little message, and the church just erupted. The church just erupted. I looked up, she had jumped up, and before you know it, she told it. I said, oh, Jesus. One of the people who she was close to in the church wouldn't have anything to do with her anymore because of her testimony. Quit. The mothers were all, they got funny looking at her, and it just was a mess. I knew it would be. They hadn't yet, they hadn't gotten there yet. Some weeks later, I'm at home working on another little message, and the phone rings. And the lady who was friends with her said to me, Brother Pastor, I need you to pray for me. I've got a serious problem. I knew what it was already. Any city that small, 10,000 black folk, I already got the news. Pastor, my daughter has left the house, and she's now living with the #1 pimp in the city. And something on the inside said, you ought to tell her. You ought to say to her, well, you put that other person, and now see what's happened to you. But the Holy Spirit had victory that day. The Holy Spirit, yeah, the new man had the victory that day. I said, all right, honey, I'm going to pray for you. I was praying for her, and it dawned on me, maybe we ought to put this situation in the hand of the woman who was on the street. Maybe we ought to just see what she can do with this. So I called her up, prayed with her. She already knew, everybody knew. I said, I want you to make that your assignment. I'm doing my little message again, and the place erupts. I look up 3 weeks later, and the baby is coming back with her bags in the hand of the woman who God saved from prostitution. And I'm saying that everybody in here has been saved from something. And if we would stop trying to act like we have always been this way and open our mouths and let people on the edge know, I haven't always been like this. I've been like you, closer than you can think of. But I know a God who is not looking for you to qualify. In fact, your only qualification is that you don't deserve what he's about to do in your life. And what a difference it would make. If you're in this place, if you're in this house, we're preaching to you to say, come. We're saying to you, come to a God who wants to bless you so badly that he'll use the only thing you have, and that's your weakness. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Will you come? Will you come to him? My soul loves Jesus. My soul loves Jesus. My soul, am I on there somewhere? Loves Jesus. Bless his name. My soul loves Jesus. My soul, come on, loves Jesus. My soul loves Jesus. Bless his name. He's a wonder in my soul. He's a wonder in my soul. He's a wonder in my soul. Bless his name. He's a wonder in my soul. He's a wonder in my soul. He's a wonder. Are you coming? In my soul. Bless his name. My Church of God in Christ brothers that say, yes, yes, oh, yes, 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 even going through, yes, yes, somebody help me. Oh, yes, yes, woo, yeah. So say yes, it'll be all right. All right, all right. It'll be all right, all right, all right, all right. Oh, you gotta know where I'm coming from. All right, woo, all right, all right. Cancer free tonight. All right. The Lord.